I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey everybody, I'm Molly Barrows, and welcome to the Gulf Coast Confidential podcast, where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up in Northwest Florida and beyond. Joining me is Pam Hill, pharmacist and an advocate for victims because she's experienced violent crime in her own family. And we like to talk about what we call these what the feezy cases, like how could this even come to be? This is definitely one of those type cases. It's called Mom-fluencer Ruby Franke makes millions peddling child abuse. Pam, it's just about as awful as it comes, I think.
It's unbelievable. You would almost think someone was tricking you or pranking you on this, because this happened right in plain sight in front of millions and millions. She had 2 million viewers, over 1 billion views, and this still happened, and here we are talking about it.
I know, and she was very pretty, still is very pretty, and it just, to me, it's an example of, you know, what is lying beneath the surface. What appears to be certainly is not always what is happening behind closed doors. And in this case, I think people did suspect that there was something awful going on, but nobody had any idea it was as bad as it was. So if you're not familiar with this case, here's a little rundown. Basically, last week, the once popular family vlogger and mother of 6, Ruby Franke, was sentenced to 4 1 to 15-year terms on each charge in prison by a Utah district court. Franke's business partner, 54-year-old Jodi Hildebrandt, was also sentenced to 4 1 to 15-year prison terms. Both women will serve those sentences consecutively. Now, they were arrested in August of last year after police found one of Franke's sons emaciated with open wounds and bound with duct tape. He had actually escaped Hildebrandt's house and gone to a neighbor's for help. And one of Franke's daughters, a 10-year-old, was found in a similar malnourished condition also in Hildebrandt's home. Franke, her husband Kevin Franke, and their 6 children were well known by some on YouTube, whereas Pam said they had 2.3 million subscribers to their now defunct channel, 8 Passengers. Franke also frequently collaborated on some pretty controversial parenting and relationship advice videos with Hildebrandt. So they had a pretty strict parenting style, both of these women, both part of the Mormon religion, and it had previously led some viewers to actually report them to authorities. She had faced a lot of backlash, Franke did, for these videos. One, because she refused to bring her then 6-year-old child lunch after the child forgot to pack the food herself. And she also threatened to throw away her prized possession. She said this is what it takes, basically, to make sure these kids understand. If they feel the consequences, this is how you get them to obey. But it's just the beginning of what we learned was what they were doing to these kids. It was just so sad to me the way that this case even came to light. But thank God that little boy ran away. But you talked about the 911 call from the neighbor, which started all of this. And I think his reaction is one that any normal person would have.
I almost cried. Well, I did the first time I heard the man. The boy that got away, I think his name was Chad, got away from the mom and went next door to a neighbor. And when he got over there, he was exhausted, like he'd just been running. He was emaciated. He was thirsty. He had open wounds. He couldn't hardly stand up. He was weak. And the man, he called 911. He said, I need someone out here now. He said, this child has been, and he couldn't come up with the word. And then the man almost started to cry talking about it.
Yeah, but detained is what he ended up saying.
Yeah, detained, okay. And then, and they're barefoot. She made them work outside in the hot sun, barefoot, no shoes, no socks. Their little feet would scab over, severe sunburn. The way that she would do their wounds, she would put cayenne pepper. That's why I brought this here. She would put cayenne pepper in their open wounds and then tape it up, instead of regular Band-Aids. She would tape it up with duct tape. And then she would just the next time Just do it again. Not even take that duct tape off. Just keep pouring that on there and more and more and more. When you can just get a Band-Aid. You could use a Band-Aid, but anything. My point is, she was not kind. She was not compassionate. She was not loving. She was not anything that would have any kind of sweetness or whatever. I don't think that the parenting style of I'm going to be a drill sergeant, and at 6 years old you're supposed to have a grasp of everything and be bullied. So this is what she was doing on her channel by herself a little bit with her husband. Now see, this husband that pops in here, that's why there's 8 passengers, Ruby Franke, Kevin Franke, and 6 children. So that's the 8 passengers. So that little channel was doing pretty good until, and they're still doing this weirdo stuff. And people are sending her stuff and telling her that's horrible. Some people put in a change.org petition. Some people just came right to her. Some people called a DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services. Mm-hmm. People were trying, but we all know the system, it just is very sluggish and slow. But I would think when someone tells you a child's being abused, and I know that there are all kind of other cases, but this was on TV. They could go look at it themselves.
Well, and she took one of her sons, took him away his bedroom, took him out of his bed for, I think, at least 6 months mm-hmm. because he played a joke on one of his brothers. Basically told him that they were going to Disney World, let him get up, get ready, even be outside waiting mm-hmm. with his sunglasses mm-hmm. on. I mean, that's just a typical prank among siblings. Yeah. It's not necessarily nice, but it's not cruel. Yeah. And it certainly, I mean, I don't know why he deserved sleeping on a beanbag for the next 6 months because of it.
Well, and then this husband of hers, Kevin, he said he did not know about all this abuse and this starvation and not having drink and proper care. How do you come in a house? You know, I don't even have to have children in my house. If I go in someone's house and I see a child acting a certain way, you've got to have some sense. And even Kevin's attorney said he's a victim too. And I'm not believing that. I'm going to straight up right now. I am not Team Kevin. I'm against him. I hold him just as responsible as Ruby Franke because he's the father. And so he can run and hide and pretend like he didn't see all that all he wants to, but he did.
Yeah, and he wasn't living there the last 13 months. She
mm-hmm.
had kicked him out because mm-hmm. of her ever-increasing closeness with Jodi Hildebrandt. Mm-hmm. And this woman, it seemed like, by some people described her as all but a cult leader. She also had these very authoritarian views on parenting, was also an advocate of basically the teachings of the Church of Latter-day Saints, which is Mormonism. And you know, I found some interesting Reddit discussions between people who had grown up in the Mormon religion, some who were still in it, some who were not in it anymore, but they were discussing this case because they felt like that there were some consistencies in experiences that they had, mm-hmm. that these women had taken some of the teachings of the Mormon church to extremes, but that there was a basis for doing that some people were okay, that mm-hmm. essentially what some of these folks believed in the Mormon religion was that, you know, don't spare the rod, otherwise you'll spoil the child. And it's better to hurt them emotionally, even physically, to the point of death in some of these cases to save their soul than it would be to let them get away with behaving badly or being impure or whatever. So that to me was scary, but I thought it was interesting that this Jodi Hildebrandt, they described her as basically all but a cult leader. And she had basically her own channel as well. And it was a life coaching service called Connexions. Mm-hmm. And there's a Instagram account that's still up with videos of her and Ruby Franke talking about different aspects of parenting, but it all just, when you know what you know now, you're looking at their videos going, God, this is terrible. And lots of people are still commenting. Mm-hmm. I can't believe this account is even still up, honestly, talking about, you know, karma's coming full circle. You're going to get yours. How dare y'all put this kind of information out there? It's cruel what mm-hmm. you're suggesting that parents do to their kids. So she was described by many people that are starting to dig into their background too. Some of her former clients described Hildebrandt as designing a program that essentially isolated people from their loved ones, that she actually destroyed marriages because of her advice, mm-hmm. that she pitted people against each other as opposed to building bridges. She was creating divides mm-hmm. and putting herself in the position of power. And it was when Ruby Franke teamed up with Jodi that essentially the two of them really got together, and it was maybe bad before, but then it really exponentially got bad. And then the next thing you know, Ruby Franke's kicking her husband out and spending a lot of time over at Jodi Hildebrandt's house, and they're making these videos and they're constantly, putting it out there. But I know you can relate to that to some extent. If you're not familiar with Pam, you might want to check out Mommy Killer 1 and 2. But Pam's sister, Sharon Adelot, was murdered by her son, Pam's nephew, Brandon Adelot. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. But she also was estranged from Sharon's daughter, Elizabeth Adelot, because her father, who became the custodian, basically had custody of Biz. It was a similar situation where he did not, because they had an ugly divorce. He had been caught trying to have sex with a student in the class that he was teaching at Pensacola High School. He actually filed for divorce from Sharon, even though she was appalled. She was trying to get police to do their job. He wanted police to cover up. And there's more on that too. The other episodes that we discuss some of these details. But in essence, Randy Adelot, the father, also went and found a counselor who would carry his water and basically validate his desire to isolate Biz away from her mother's side of the family. And that's what it sounds to me like Hildebrandt was doing. She had this pattern of isolating and separating and damaging relationships as opposed to helping them.
Right. And just straight out telling lies, because the first thing that most people do when they want to control someone is isolate them from anybody that has any love or care for them. And this particular psychologist practices right there in Gulf Breeze, right there on the main street. Randy got with her. Randy and his sister got with her. She called me up not even 2 weeks after my sister had been murdered. And basically told me I had to come meet with her if I was ever going to see Biz again or be in her life. And I went there. I don't know why, but I went there, and Randy was sitting in there, Randy's sister, and this psychologist. And they were sitting in there, and they were laughing and eating and having Chick-fil-A all together. And she started telling me things I had to do to be around my niece. And I said, what is wrong with you? I'm not your patient. You're not my counselor. And I know this is unprofessional. And I know this is outside of professional parameters. And then she told Randy, you may go get Biz now. And brought Biz in there. And Biz sat by me. I mean, her mom had only been dead for a couple of weeks. And then, so she started, that's when it all started. And that's when I started asking. She put me through so much. I literally almost died during that. I had a relapse I am in recovery. I had a relapse of with a lorazepam. I was taking that for my nerves during that time. And then my other sister, Patricia, she thought, this lady's going to kill my sister. So Patricia, my sister, filed with the Department of Health and with the Florida Board of Psychology and put in a complaint on her. And we found out she did this to another family. What she does is she takes the husband's side and she turns the husband and the children against the mommies and the mommies' families.
She's a paid gun for hire of sorts.
Exactly. And she got with an attorney right there in Pensacola, right there close by. She and that attorney got together and started threatening me, filed stalking charges on us, and even said, if you say something about her, I'm coming after you. So basically, they're each other's thing. And she basically told us if we would take our complaint with the Department of Health away, she would let us see Biz again.
Right. And that's what the attorney said that was representing Randy and working with Darby.
Right. And then there's also the guardian ad litem, and then a judge that turns his head to everything. I have been through this. My family's been through this for 10 years. And so for the 10 years that we have been going through this, I have had 4 other families that have told me that this psychologist did the same thing to their families and that they have reported her, and their families are irreparable. I choose not to think my family's irreparable. I will get to see my niece again because I am not done. I'm still filing complaints on these people. These are professional people that all got together and basically emotionally, spiritually, and mentally raped my niece. and kept her away from our whole family so they could do this, because we're the voice of reason. We're the ones, just like in that last case we talked
and you're
about.
the truth tellers. There's also a lot that went on with that particular case that led up before Brandon murdered Sharon. And even though he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, it was brutal. It made headlines around the world. He all but decapitated her. They had to use orthopedic surgical tools to remove the knife that he embedded in Sharon's eye. No wonder you had anxiety. No wonder you were dealing with depression. It's one thing to lose a family member when you expect it. It's horrible when you lose them unexpectedly, be it a car accident, but to lose them to violence and at domestic violence, no less. Okay. And especially when you add a father in there who was no help to her, no help when she was trying to get Brandon help, and then now has this opportunity to basically stick it to everybody who he feels like mistreated him, and all y'all ever did was try to hold him accountable and say, hey, do right, do help out around the house, get to work on time, stop trying to have sex with 14-year-old girls in your class. And he didn't want to hear that, and he basically, I think, in my opinion, from what I saw, taught his son to do the same thing. But you can find out more about those and details and Mommy Killer 1 and 2, also Murder and Madness and Confessions in the Field House. It's a very complex case and it's ongoing, but that's why Pam and I bring it up, because she can relate so much to a lot of these cases that we talk about. And in this one, it's about child abuse and these two women that basically got together, egged each other on to a certain extent, and took it to a whole nother level. And this Hildebrandt was the Randy Adelot of sorts, if you will, in this case. And also the role of this psychologist who was detrimental in alienating you from your niece. This same type of behavior, this controlling, manipulative behavior of I'm superior, what I think is best. And it's also, they attach so much motive to these children, like they deserve to be treated this way because they knew what they were doing when they disobeyed, or this is the only way to root out this evilness that's in them, or this decision making to be rebellious, if you will. They're just children.
Yeah, and all children really should have to do each day is breathe. To me, we are here to teach them. We're not here to teach them by a red hot poker or something like that. I learn better when someone's kind to me. I learn better when someone tells me why or has patience with me. I mean, we're adults and we mess it up every day. I just can't imagine it. Literally, I will turn into a pool of sorrow if I think about this way, way, way more. Because the thing is, she was allowed to do this just like these people are allowed to do it in my family. Praise God that I am in recovery. I had 14 years of recovery before I relapsed over my sister's murder by her own child, knowing all the savage details and watching what a community was doing to my family. There are people that signed on with Randy, that doubled down and helped keep my family estranged, and they're still doing it.
Because they got some sort of a social bump in their mind, I think, by being a caretaker of the poor orphan of Gulf Breeze, because he was using her as a fundraiser.
Right. Well, Randy put her out there as she was like a charity case. Our family...
Because he was unemployed.
Right. Our family wanted to help take care of biz, and we always will. We love her. We will always help her.
But you're not going to be there to let them use you as a doormat either.
No, they're not going to do that.
Right.
But the thing is that right is right and wrong is wrong. That is why my sister was murdered 10 years ago, and I have not put this down because I know right from wrong. And this story right here gives me hope, because I'm fixing to tell all the story, what happened to Sharon Hill, Adelot, and what's happening with my niece and my family. And I praise God for recovery. I praise God for good families. And I praise God that people get outed when they do this stuff right here.
Absolutely. And plenty of people did comment and say how awful it was. But again, they just ignored it and just were hedged in their own little world of reality where cruelty seemed like the right thing to do. And I agree with you. It just seems to go against every basic instinct as a mother, as a human being, as a woman, to hurt any child, but much less your own, and to allow someone else to do that. And so, well, including the father, and we'll get more into him in a minute, but Ruby Franke's reaction in court I thought was interesting at the sentencing. And part of it makes me think, is this the YouTuber Franke that we're seeing, or is this the mother Franke? Because I don't know how you go from allowing your child to basically be dehydrated, emaciated, treated like a torture victim, not allowed to have water. And also what broke my heart too, before I get into her quote unquote tearful apology in court was how the man, the neighbor who called 911, he also said, this little boy is telling me it's his own fault that he was treated this way. And that's the kind of thing, especially as a mother of a 12-year-old daughter, that breaks my heart. I mean, God gave us kids. They're born loving you. They're born just loving the heck out of you most of the time, unless I guess there's something wrong with them. But at any rate, to take a child that wants to please, that wants to do the right thing, they all need to be guided and disciplined, and to tell them that not only are you doing these things that are life-threatening and causing permanent physical and emotional damage, but you're piling on and telling them it's their own fault. So you've boxed them in. There's no way for you to find relief. There's no way for you to be the good boy or the good girl. It's always they're in charge, and you're bringing this on yourself. And that's the double mind F to me, what they did to these kids. And that's just horrific. So when I say that she apologized, you know, it's hard for me to feel what she was trying to convey if she meant it. But basically she told her children in court at her sentencing, I believed dark was light and right was wrong. I would do anything in this world for you. I took from you all that was soft and safe and good. For the past 4 years, I've chosen to follow counsel and guidance that has led me into a dark delusion. My distorted version of reality went largely unchecked as I would isolate from anyone who challenged me. All that's quote unquote. But she said basically now she's going to use prison as a time for her personal growth. And that almost just sounds like a textbook PR line of, look, I've changed. Sorry, I won't do it again. Well, you didn't just put bad milk back in the fridge. You know, you treated your children like they were concentration camp victims.
Well, I personally don't think she means it. She's an expert YouTuber. She's learned how to do this. She and her husband got a little show going called 8 Passengers. It's a mommy, daddy, and 6 children. Big deal. Big deal. And you're not exactly giving good parenting advice or spiritual parenting advice or feel-good advice or anything new. You are doubling down and treating your children like this in plain sight, like these people, like these deviants do. They do that in plain sight, and they dare someone to say something about them. And guess what? People did. And let me tell you something. I do not believe her 1 second. I think she's brilliant at the sale. I think she's brilliant as she knows, because like you said, she got 1 to 15 years, 4 counts of that to be served consecutively. The judge made it a point to say that. And this whole way of doing this, the 1 to 15 years, the judge has already sentenced her to that. Now, the amount of time that she'll get on each one of those counts is that in where they're from, there is a board that looks at their behavior, if they're remorseful, the way they act in prison, the way other relatives and other people interviewing, it takes in everything. And they could literally give her anywhere from 1 to 15. They could say, you're going to get 10 years for each of them. 10, 10, 10, 10. You are going to serve 40 years. Well, Ruby Franke went in there apologetic. She had her little hair fixed, had her little prison gown or prison top tucked
Super
in her
sorry,
pants.
I tortured my kids.
Yeah, and said, I want to thank the police. I want to thank the hospital. I want to thank the church. I want to thank my children. I want to thank the government for all of them for catching me like she's some big criminal character out there. She is a criminal. There's no doubt about that. And then she goes on to say, the minute that Deputy so-and-so put those handcuffs on me is the moment I got my freedom. Well, congratulations. Your children have never had freedom, and they never will, because hopefully they will get help. But you have taught them shame. You have taught them to feel less than. You have taught them to please just you, and you are a monster. No, I don't believe any of it, not 1 second of it. And I do not believe Jodi Hildebrandt. At least she was more true to herself. She came in there kind of hard-assed and act like, but this little crazy said, oh, it's these kids' fault. I love them kids. It's their fault, basically. So we know just by the little posturing these two have done, and Ruby Franke looked cute coming in there. Jodi Hildebrandt looked like death warmed over, So we know who's going to serve the longer term. Mark my word.
Well, and also because Ruby Franke said she would testify against Hildebrandt. So basically she got to the prosecution first.
Right.
And she's the cuter one and the prettier one. And she's basically saying she manipulated me and I was, but
Yeah, but I don't
all
care.
of that was in her. Anyway, but I'm just saying that's why that's what they think she'll
right.
get less. But she also said she wanted to reconcile with her family members. And I thought it was interesting that her sister put out a tweet right after her, one of her sisters put out a basically on social media, right, not long after she was sentenced, saying, I love my kids. Not Satan himself could make me hurt my kids.
And I love that lady because not a truer thing's ever been said, because that is how people that love their children do. I even think I don't know people that don't love their children that I know of, but I mean, can't you just look at a child sometimes? Can't you just look at a child when they're overwhelmed or scared or know they've done something wrong and see their little lip quivering or see them processing stuff in their little head? Can't you see that and see they're already upset enough? You know, who in the world, I can't even believe she went on as long as she did. I didn't know she had this channel because I know me. I mean, I don't know what I could have done because I'm fighting my case right now, but I am a hell raiser and I don't stop.
Well, that's what's so interesting. Like I said, when you look at that Connections Instagram account, there's even some comments on there when you're looking at the dates of the videos, and some people made the observation. So did you have these kids emaciated, locked up, duct taped, kidnapped, essentially treating them like kidnap victims while you were making this video? This would have been around that time frame. So it's horrifying to think about that you could be that separated from your conscience, that you can't even begin to put yourself in another person's shoes. You wouldn't treat another human. I certainly wouldn't imagine treating anybody this way, much less my own child, and just not to have that empathy for them. But, lawyers for Franke said that Hildebrandt, quote unquote, systematically isolated her over a prolonged period of time, which caused her to adopt a distorted sense of morality. But I would say she was already going down that path pretty hard before she and Hildebrandt teamed up. And she also, Hildebrandt, gave a brief statement to the court when she was sentenced as well. And she said, quote, "I desire for the children to heal physically and emotionally. One of the reasons I did not go to trial is because I did not want them to emotionally relive the experience, which would have been detrimental to them. My hope and prayer is that they will heal and move forward to have beautiful lives." So basically, how altruistic of her. Oh, I just didn't want them to have to relive all the torture, all the cayenne, all the denying them water, all the denying them food, all the cruel and unusual emotional punishment that we heaped on them along with the physical punishment. That's a crap apology.
Yeah. Oh, she's just so
she's
out
still
there.
drinking her own Kool-Aid.
And they told them all that's being done to you is being done in love. That's what they told them. And yes, this was going on while they're taping. Ruby Franke and that bunch would get up and she would tape at 5 or 6 in the morning, every morning, 5 times a week. This is how she made her money, torturing and hurting her own children and peddling that BS out there for other people to take in.
She even told her audience at one point that she denied her 2 littlest ones Christmas because they didn't obey the family rules.
Yeah.
Left them out of Christmas. That's just, and that's the kind of thing that people knew about and were up in arms about, that and taking away the bed and not letting the little 6-year-old have lunch because she forgot to make it and had to learn her lesson. And it's just excessively cruel. And I think people picked up on it, but had no idea that what was happening behind closed doors. But the DA did say that Hildebrandt especially showed absolutely no remorse.
Well, and I think
and that the children, she said, were the perpetrators.
That's what she said. She blamed it on the kids. And we all know how making someone feel ashamed makes them feel, especially a child, because they want to please us and stuff like that. But I think the reason they pled is because A, they're caught, and B, this investigation is not stopping. This investigation is going to go more and more and more. They ran in there to get that sentencing done because when we find out all the other stuff they've done, just like I've found out more stuff about what's been done to my family, it's all going to hit the fan.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me a little bit of the Duggar family, too, because they also had their TV show. They also were popping out kids left and right, having the older kids raise the younger kids. I never really watched the show that much when it was on, but, we now know that there was just a lot of terrible things that were happening behind the scenes. And there's another episode that Pam and I did talking about that. In fact, it's called I Don't Dig the Duggars. And some of the kids that were in that system, that family system, if you will, destructive family system, talked about the patriarchy and the systematic way that their beliefs were taught to their children and to other family members of this particular type of church. So you are getting into, again, this sort of cult-like belief that, we need to raise these kids a certain way. They have to be brought up this way. And basing it on educational materials that perpetrated and supported parents basically being cruel to their little ones to get them under control. And that's why I feel like, with these religious systems that any religious system that supports abusing your children or isolating you from people that you love, like in the Mormon church, if you decide you don't want to do it, sometimes families will completely alienate themselves from you. You're not allowed to have a relationship with them anymore. And it's that is cult-like behavior. If you're not going to believe like we believe, we're not going to have anything to do with you. That's rejecting the person along with the behavior. And that to me is a warning sign. That's cult behavior to me. And that's what I picked up on some of these Reddit discussions. Again, members current and previous of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and they were saying that some of the teachers say if punishment or even death are required in order to make a person worthy for the celestial kingdom, then it is considered acceptable. And there was a quote that they said, there is no true Latter-day Saint who would not rather bury a son or daughter than to have him or her lose his or her chastity, realizing that chastity is of more value than anything else in the world, end quote. And that was what supposedly this prophet Grant, according to this gospel standards is what it was called, said. So these are some of the teachings that this particular group was basing some of these decisions on. They were taking this and exponentially expanding on it. But really it just came down to, in my opinion, one woman that just wanted to make money and liked the attention that she was getting, and another woman that thought she was the most powerful and controlling of the bunch. And basically they teamed up and got together like a non-dynamic duo. And hurt their own children and didn't care. They would have continued to go on doing it. And the other thing that they were saying, talking about the Church of Latter-day Saints, is that, again, that's a very patriarchal system, and that they tell women all the time that their highest calling is motherhood, but it doesn't change your nature. What if you don't want to be a mother? Or what if you only want to be a mother to one or two, but you're encouraged to just keep having children? They said that there's this pressure to be perfect, and they would rather you seem to be than to actually be. And so I think they were saying too that it doesn't excuse anything that Ruby Franke did by any stretch, but they were saying maybe she was one of those. Maybe she, cracked under this pressure and it became about her as opposed to, but who cares? Whatever the reason is.
Well, I mean, even if
that's
she did,
unjustifiable.
Even if she did, she didn't play that role all the way out there because she's a smart ass. She's a smart mouth. She's a smart ass. She did whatever she wanted to, however she wanted to, because when people begged to differ with her, she was like, basically don't watch or don't do this. And this is what baffles me. If you have 50 people in a room and someone said, I'm fixing to spank my child, a little pop on the hiney, 25 of us would say don't, and 25 of us would say go ahead. So that's just normal. Half the people are going to think a different way because people parent differently. But I guarantee you that most everybody with good sense in there would not say, well, hurt them or make them embarrassed or make it where they can't bounce back from this or make it where you physically hurt them. Let me tell you what all she did to them, to those kids. The physical torture, emaciated, thirsty, excessive punishment. She had them walk up and down the steps with boxes full of books, up and down, for no reason whatsoever, until she just got tired of them doing it. Severe manual labor outside in the yard in the hot sun to where they had severe sunburns. Their little skin was sunburned, off almost. No shoes, no socks. Told them they were possessed and evil. That's the part that is extra for me, for her to say that. I'm telling you, this person, I don't even want to call her a lady, this woman,
she's
female
a wolf
person.
in sheep's clothing.
I do not know, and I guarantee you in prison, she's going to end up getting beat up every day. Because, people don't like all that. You're hurting children and stuff like that. Not even in prison.
Well, and I can't help but think of all the millions of viewers that they had. And did anybody pick up on this and be like, yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and
Do
be a
this
real
too?
SOB to my kids too.
No, I think people said something about it. Like I said, I know the frustration. I have been voicing what is wrong and what I know is wrong, what I have in writing, what I have documented for 10 years. And I have a judge that turns his head that doesn't care. I sent him a 47-page letter on it. I've gotten with attorneys. I've probably spent $100,000 on attorneys. So they just do what they want. But I guarantee you, you're not going to do that to somebody in my family and not live to hear about it. I'm going to keep screaming about it.
And that's what is one of the things that we like to talk about regularly with each of these cases, because, even some of the ones that we've done recently, if it weren't for family members speaking out on behalf of their their loved ones who were murdered or abused somehow, then it's the perpetrator's narrative who gets heard.
Right. Silence is on the side of the oppressor. The only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good men and women to do nothing. So here we are with this. But, it already messes up the child's mind. Look at this. It's messed up my niece for 10 years. It's messed up these 6 children, because praise God, they are in with not either one of the parents. The children are with, I think, foster parents. And I pray that they are with good people. Because me not being able to be around Elizabeth, the prayer that I had to learn to pray was, please God, if you're not going to let me or my family or my sister be around Elizabeth, put good people that know you and love you, Lord, around her.
Absolutely. And we'll just continue to pray for that. But it's interesting about Franke Ruby, I think, too. They had total of 8 kids. There's 2 adult children, along with the 6 that were part of the show. And I'm not sure which ones, but at least one of the children has basically separated from the family, doesn't want anything to do with the parents. I think that's one of the older children. But at any rate, I think that's great that they're not with the dad. Because to your point, whether he was there when some of the horrible stuff was happening or not, he knew he didn't have anything to do with his kids. He just didn't see him for a year and a half. And even before that, 13 months that he was basically kicked out of the house, he had to have seen that there were other issues. He must have been okay with some of it.
Right. And why would you leave? If you thought...
And why wasn't he charged?
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's going to be, because I hope people don't rest until then. There's no way for him to say that he's a victim. He's not a victim.
Well, it's interesting, too, because he's now filed for divorce. I bet you that's his way of trying to separate. Also, she's going to be in prison for a long time. I'm wondering if he doesn't have another girlfriend.
Well, that's what we see on these stories and stuff. And then, no, he cannot get away with that either. People need to look into him and see what he was doing. There are daddies that don't live in the same house with their children that can tell you how their children are doing. There are mommies that don't live in the same house with their children. There are parents that love their children and are interested in their children. And I guarantee you, even as an aunt, I would know if a child that I just knew that lived in my neighborhood was emaciated, sunburned, beat down, and hungry. That's why that man next door could not even hardly make the words to make the report.
I know. It was just so touching to hear that 911 call.
I love him.
It was awful that those kids were put through that. And they were saying that the neighbors back, because Hildebrandt lived several hours away from where Ruby Franke lived, and Franke's neighbors were even saying that they'd been concerned about the kids that remained because she was only taking the 2 youngest ones with her to Hildebrandt. And the other ones were basically roaming the neighborhood sometimes, looking for other kids to play with during the school day, that kind of thing. So just all in all, there were just a lot of problems and a lot of concern. So I'm glad they were finally caught. I guess my takeaways are just keep knocking on doors, keep calling and screaming for help, even when you don't see it happening, because thank God that little kid ran to that neighbor.
Right.
Thank goodness he cared enough to call for help.
Right. And thank God that was a good man next door. I don't even think you'd have to be a middleman or anything like that to care.
Some people don't want to get involved. Some people wouldn't have even answered the door.
Yep, I get that. But praise God that he did it.
Yes.
And, I'm thinking about things like that. You don't ever give up. I'll never give up on my sister and my niece and my family. Both my parents died without seeing my little niece or their granddaughter because of a narrative like this. So my takeaway is I still don't dig the Duggars. And Ruby Franke, frankly, I don't give a damn what happens to you.
Yeah, I agree with you about that.
100%.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how much they both get, and we'll stay on top of that and we'll update it. But I appreciate you weighing in on this.
Thank you.
And we thank you so much for joining us. That's it for Mom-fluencer Ruby Franke makes millions peddling child abuse. We appreciate you joining us for Gulf Coast Confidential. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher, Pam Hill. And of course, a big thanks as always to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. Don't forget, you can listen to more Gulf Coast Confidential episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. You can also watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Just don't forget to like and subscribe, y'all, and we'll see you next time.